The dusty winds of southeastern Arizona could strip paint from wood, but they had only made Adelaide Kane stronger as she gripped the axe and brought it down on another log, splitting it clean through the middle with practiced precision. It was July 1882, and the sun beat mercilessly on the small ranch just outside of Naco, Arizona Territory, where the landscape stretched endlessly in shades of brown and gold, interrupted only by scattered mesquite and the occasional saguaro standing sentinel against the horizon. Adelaide wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her forearm, her calloused hands aching from the morning's work. She had been up since before dawn, tending to the chickens, repairing fence posts that the monsoon rains had loosened, and now chopping wood for the stove. At 22 years old, she had been running this small homestead alone for nearly 3 years, ever since her father had succumbed to pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. The ranch was modest, just enough land to support a small vegetable garden, a handful of chickens, 2 horses, and a milk cow. It was barely enough to keep her fed and clothed, but it was hers, and she had worked every single day to keep it from falling into disrepair or being claimed by the bank. Her hands showed every hour of that labor, rough and marked with small scars from splinters, rope burns, and the countless other hazards of frontier life. Adelaide set down the axe and flexed her fingers, feeling the tightness in her joints. She looked down at her palms, at the thick calluses that had formed across the base of her fingers and the pads of her hands. They were not the soft, delicate hands of the women who lived in town, the wives of merchants and bankers who could afford to worry about such things. These were working hands, and while part of her sometimes felt self-conscious about their rough appearance, another part of her wore them with quiet pride. They were proof that she had survived, that she had not given up when everyone expected her to sell the property and move back east to live with relatives who had made it clear she would be more burden than welcome. She gathered an armload of split wood and carried it to the small house, its adobe walls keeping the interior mercifully cooler than the scorching heat outside. After stacking the wood beside the stove, Adelaide poured herself a cup of water from the pitcher and drank deeply. She needed to ride into Naco to pick up supplies. Her flour was running low, and she needed more sugar and coffee. The trip would take most of the afternoon, but it could not wait any longer. Adelaide changed from her work dress into her slightly less worn town dress, a simple cotton garment in faded blue that she kept as clean as possible for her infrequent trips to civilization. She braided her chestnut hair, pinned it up under her bonnet, and headed out to saddle Penny, her bay mare. The ride to Naco took just over an hour, and Adelaide arrived in the small border town as the afternoon heat reached its peak. Naco sat right on the international boundary line between the United States and Mexico, and it was a place where cultures mixed freely, where Spanish and English were spoken with equal frequency, and where cattle ranchers and prospectors rubbed shoulders with merchants and railroad men. The town was still relatively new, having grown up in recent years around the railroad and the nearby mining operations. Adelaide tied Penny to the hitching post outside Morrison's general store and stepped up onto the wooden sidewalk, grateful to be out of the direct sun. She entered the store, her eyes adjusting to the dimmer interior. Mr. Morrison, a portly man with mutton chops and a perpetually harried expression, stood behind the counter tallying accounts in a leather-bound ledger. "Miss Kane," he greeted her with a nod. "What can I do for you today?" "I need flour, sugar, and coffee, please," Adelaide said, approaching the counter. "And some salt if you have it." "I have all of that," Mr. Morrison confirmed, setting down his pencil. "How much flour?" 20 pounds should do." As Mr. Morrison gathered her supplies, Adelaide noticed a group of men standing near the back of the store, examining saddles and tack. Cowboys, by the look of them, probably working one of the larger ranches that sprawled across the territory. One of them, tall with dark hair visible beneath his hat, turned slightly, and Adelaide caught a glimpse of his profile. He seemed vaguely familiar, though she could not immediately place him. Mr. Morrison returned with her items wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Adelaide counted out her money carefully, handing over the precious coins that represented the profit from selling eggs and vegetables to other families in the area. Every dollar mattered when you were living as close to the edge as she was. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," she said, gathering her packages. "You take care, Miss Kane," the shopkeeper replied. "Roads have been a bit troublesome lately. Mexican revolutionaries causing problems down south, and you know how that spills over sometimes." Adelaide nodded. She had heard the talk, the rumors of bandits and unrest. It made her uneasy, living alone as she did, but she had little choice in the matter. She carried her supplies outside and was securing them to her saddle when she heard boots on the wooden planks behind her. "Need some help with that?" The voice was deep and pleasant, with the slight drawl common to men who had spent their lives working cattle across the open range. Adelaide turned to find herself looking at the tall cowboy she had noticed in the store. Up close, she could see he was likely in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of good whiskey. He had a strong jaw shadowed with a few days' worth of stubble, and there was something both confident and respectful in the way he regarded her. "I can manage, thank you," Adelaide replied, though the heavy bag of flour was indeed awkward to balance while tying it down properly. "I am sure you can," the man said, and there was no condescension in his tone, just simple acknowledgement. "But I was raised to offer anyway. Name is Dylan Jameson. I work for the Copper Creek Ranch, about 15 miles northeast of here." Adelaide hesitated, then decided there was no harm in accepting help, especially when her alternative was potentially dropping 20 pounds of flour in the dirt. "Adelaide Kane. I have a small place north of town." Dylan stepped forward and steadied the flour sack while Adelaide secured the rope, his hands large and weathered, as work-worn as her own. She noticed the way he handled things with care, despite his obvious strength. When the supplies were secure, he stepped back and touched the brim of his hat. "The Kane place," he said, recognition dawning in his expression. "I knew your father a little. Good man. I was sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you," Adelaide said quietly. The grief had dulled over time, but it still ached like an old injury when the weather changed. "Did you know him well?" "Not well," Dylan admitted. "But he helped me out once when I was just starting at Copper Creek. My horse threw a shoe about a mile from your place, and he let me use his forge to fix it. Would not take a penny for it either. Said helping neighbors was just what people did out here." Adelaide felt a warmth in her chest. That sounded exactly like something her father would have done. He had believed strongly in the unwritten codes of the frontier, in helping those who needed it and trusting that help would be returned when your own troubles came. "That sounds like him," she agreed. "How are you managing out there on your own?" Dylan asked, and before Adelaide could bristle at the question, he added, "I only ask because I know how much work it takes to keep a place running. I grew up on a small ranch in Texas, and it took my whole family just to keep things going." There was genuine curiosity in his question, not judgment, and Adelaide found herself relaxing slightly. "It stays busy," she admitted, "but I manage well enough." "I do not doubt it," Dylan said, and his eyes flicked briefly to her hands where they rested on the saddle. Adelaide resisted the urge to hide them, to tuck them into her skirts where he could not see the rough, reddened skin and broken nails. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze. "I should get back before it gets too late," she said. "Of course. Safe travels, Miss Kane." Adelaide mounted Penny and turned the mare back toward home, very aware of Dylan's eyes on her as she rode away. She told herself it did not matter what he thought of her rough appearance or her rough hands. She told herself she had no time or energy for such thoughts. But as the miles passed and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, she found her mind returning to the cowboy with the kind eyes and respectful manner. The next few weeks passed in their usual rhythm of unrelenting work. Adelaide's days began before sunrise and ended well after dark. She tended her garden, fighting a constant battle against the heat and the hungry wildlife that saw her vegetables as a convenient food source. She repaired the chicken coop after a coyote tried to dig under it one night. She rode fence lines, checking for breaks and weak spots. She hauled water, chopped wood, cleaned, cooked, and did all the 1,000 other tasks that keeping a homestead required. Her hands grew more calloused with each passing day, the skin toughening further, splitting occasionally when the work was particularly hard or when she forgot to rub a little lard into them at night. She told herself it did not matter. These hands kept her fed and housed. These hands proved she could survive without a husband, without anyone to depend on but herself. But sometimes, in the evening, when she sat on her small porch and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, she felt the loneliness settle over her like a physical weight. The silence of the desert was profound, broken only by the occasional coyote call or the rustle of small creatures in the brush. There was no one to talk to, no one to share the small victories or the frustrating setbacks. No one to help when the work seemed overwhelming, or to remind her that there was more to life than simple survival. It was on one of those evenings, about 3 weeks after her trip to town, that Adelaide heard the sound of approaching horses. She stood immediately, her heart rate quickening. Unexpected visitors could mean trouble, especially with the increased bandit activity that had been reported lately. She stepped inside long enough to grab her father's rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded before returning to the porch. 3 riders were approaching from the south, silhouetted against the setting sun. As they drew closer, Adelaide could make out more details. Cowboys, by their dress and bearing, and one of them was distinctly familiar even at a distance. Dylan Jameson sat tall in his saddle, and Adelaide felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as she recognized him. She lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it near as the 3 men rode into her yard and stopped a respectful distance from the porch. "Miss Kane," Dylan called out, touching his hat brim. "Sorry to come by unannounced. We are driving some cattle up from the south pastures to Copper Creek and saw your place. Wondered if you might be willing to sell some water for our horses and fill our canteens. We can pay, of course." The other 2 cowboys with him looked tired and dusty from a long day in the saddle. The request was reasonable, and refusing water to travelers was considered poor form in this harsh land, where it was such a precious commodity. "No need to pay," Adelaide said, setting the rifle aside and stepping down from the porch. "The well is over there. Help yourselves, but do not let the horses drink too fast if they are overheated." "We know better than that, but thank you for the reminder," Dylan said with a slight smile. He dismounted, and the other 2 cowboys followed suit. Adelaide watched as they led their horses to the water trough beside the well. Dylan worked the pump, his shoulders moving easily with the motion, while the other men held the horses and monitored their drinking. There was a practiced efficiency to their movements, the unspoken coordination of men who worked together regularly. "You have a nice place here," one of the other cowboys commented, looking around at the neat yard, the well-maintained fences, the garden that was managing to produce, despite the difficult conditions. He was younger than Dylan, probably close to Adelaide's own age with sandy hair and a sunburned nose. "You keep it up all yourself." "I do," Adelaide confirmed. "That is impressive, madam," the third cowboy added. He was older, perhaps in his 40s, with graying temples and the weathered look of a man who had spent decades under the sun. "Takes a lot of sand to make a go of it alone out here." "I do not have much choice in the matter," Adelaide replied pragmatically. Dylan filled the canteens in addition to watering the horses, and when they were finished, he walked back to where Adelaide stood near the porch. The other two cowboys had moved off slightly, giving them space while they checked their saddles and gear. "We really do appreciate it," Dylan said. "Water can be scarce, especially this time of year." "I know it well enough," Adelaide replied. "My well is good, though. It has never run dry, even in the worst heat. You are fortunate in that." Dylan glanced around the property, his gaze taking in the details. "You really are keeping the place up well. Your father would be proud." The simple words hit Adelaide harder than she expected, and she had to swallow against the sudden tightness in her throat. "I hope so," she managed. Dylan's expression softened. "I lost my own father 5 years ago," he said quietly. "Threw him from a horse and he hit his head. It was hard, leaving my mother and sisters behind in Texas, but they had my older brother to help them, and I needed to make my own way. I understand something of what you are going through, being alone with all this responsibility." Adelaide looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine understanding in his eyes. Not pity, but empathy. It was a rare gift, and she felt something shift inside her, some small defensive wall beginning to crack. "It gets lonely sometimes," she admitted, the words escaping before she could think better of them. "I imagine it does," Dylan agreed. "Though I expect you are too busy most of the time to dwell on it." "That is the truth," Adelaide said with a slight smile. "Dylan, we should get moving if we want to make the northern range before full dark," the older cowboy called out. Dylan nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Adelaide. "Thank you again for the water. If you ever need anything, if you run into trouble or need an extra hand with something, Copper Creek is not too far. Just ask for me, and I will come help if I can. That is a genuine offer, Miss Kane. Your father helped me once, and I would like to return the favor." "I will remember that," Adelaide said, surprised by how much she wanted to believe him, to trust that the offer was real and not just empty frontier courtesy. Dylan mounted his horse with easy grace, and the three cowboys turned their mounts north. Adelaide watched them ride away until they disappeared into the gathering dusk, feeling the loneliness settle back over her, but somehow less heavy than before. August brought its monsoon rains, violent thunderstorms that rolled across the desert with dramatic fury, dumping precious water, and then moving on as quickly as they had arrived. Adelaide spent one entire afternoon battling a leak in her roof, climbing up with tar and shingles to patch the spot where water was dripping into her bedroom. The work was precarious and exhausting, and she came down from the roof with tar under her fingernails and new blisters on her palms from the hammer. That evening, as she sat at her small table eating a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, she looked at her hands in the lamplight. They were a mess, honestly. The new blisters had formed over existing calluses, and there was an old rope burn across her right palm that had not quite healed. Her nails were torn and dirty despite her best efforts to clean them. These were not hands that would grace a fine parlor or look elegant holding a teacup, but they were strong hands. They were capable hands. They had patched a roof and fixed fences and brought in a garden harvest and kept her alive and independent. That had to count for something, even if it did not fit society's image of what a woman's hands should look like. The next morning brought a problem that even Adelaide's stubborn determination could not immediately solve. She went out to check on her horses and found Penny standing in the corral holding her right foreleg at an awkward angle. Adelaide's heart sank as she approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice so as not to spook the mare. "Easy, girl. Let me see what is wrong." Penny allowed Adelaide to examine the leg, and what she found made her stomach clench with worry. The mare had a stone wedged deep in her hoof, and the area around it was already swollen and hot to the touch. Adelaide knew about caring for horses. Her father had taught her well, but getting the stone out and treating the potential infection would require supplies she did not have. She needed a proper hoof pick and likely some poultice materials. More importantly, with Penny lame, Adelaide had no way to get to town. Her other horse, an older gelding named Rusty, was theoretically rideable, but he had gone lame himself years ago, and her father had kept him purely for light cart work around the property. Riding him the distance to Naco would likely leave him permanently unsound. Adelaide spent the morning trying to work the stone free with the tools she had, but it was wedged tight, and she did not want to risk making things worse by using too much force in the wrong direction. By noon, she was frustrated and genuinely worried. Without a horse, she was trapped. If something went wrong, if she needed help, she had no way to reach anyone. She sat on the porch steps, staring at her hands, at the broken blisters and embedded dirt, and felt the weight of her isolation pressing down on her. She hated feeling helpless. She had worked so hard to prove she could handle everything herself, and now something as simple as a stone in a hoof might defeat her. The afternoon heat was at its peak when Adelaide heard the sound of a horse approaching. She stood, shading her eyes against the glare, and felt her heart lift slightly as she recognized Dylan Jameson riding toward her property. He was alone this time, and as he drew closer, she could see concern cross his features as he took in her expression. "Miss Kane," he greeted, dismounting near the porch. "I was passing by on my way to check some of our southern fence lines and thought I would stop and see how you were managing. Is everything all right? You look troubled." Adelaide was torn between relief at seeing someone who might be able to help and embarrassment at needing that help. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. "My mare has a stone wedged in her hoof," she explained. "I've been trying to get it out all morning, but I cannot manage it properly with the tools I have, and the area is starting to swell. I am worried about infection." Dylan's expression turned serious immediately. "Let me take a look. I have proper tools in my saddlebag." He followed Adelaide to the corral, and she pointed out Penny. Dylan approached the mare slowly, speaking in a low, calm voice that seemed to put the nervous horse at ease almost immediately. He ran his hands down her leg, examining the swelling, then carefully lifted the hoof. "You are right to be concerned," he said after a moment. "That is wedged in deep, but I think I can get it out without causing more damage. Hold her head, will you? Talk to her and keep her calm." Adelaide moved to Penny's head, holding the halter and stroking the mare's neck while speaking softly. Dylan retrieved tools from his saddlebag, including a proper hoof pick and what looked like specialized pliers. He worked carefully, taking his time, and Adelaide found herself watching his hands as he worked. They were as scarred and calloused as her own, marked by years of hard labor. There was something oddly comforting about that, about seeing the evidence of his work life written across his skin just as hers was. After several minutes of careful maneuvering, Dylan managed to extract the stone. It was larger than Adelaide had realized, a sharp-edged piece of rock that must have been incredibly painful for Penny to step on. "Got it," Dylan announced with satisfaction. He examined the hoof carefully, his expression focused. The good news is I do not think there is any serious damage beyond bruising and inflammation. The bad news is she should not be ridden for at least a week, probably 2, to let this heal properly. Do you have any drawing salve or poultice material?" Adelaide shook her head, feeling her cheeks heat with frustration. "I used the last of it on a splinter that got infected a few weeks back. I meant to get more in town, but I kept putting it off." "I have some," Dylan assured her. "It is back at the ranch, but I can bring it by tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Kane, I do not mean to pry into your business, but with your horse lame, you are pretty isolated out here. If you need supplies from town or anything else, I would be happy to help." "I cannot pay you for that kind of service," Adelaide said stiffly, hating how the words tasted but needing to be honest. "I am not asking for payment," Dylan replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Your father helped me when I needed it, and I told you I would like to return that favor. Besides, it is just being neighborly. You would do the same for me if situations were reversed, I expect." Adelaide wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she could not. Not with Penny lame. And Dylan was right that she would help him if he needed it. That was how things worked out here. You helped your neighbors because someday you would need help yourself. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you. I would appreciate it." Dylan smiled, and Adelaide noticed how it changed his whole face, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "It is settled then. I will finish checking our fence lines and head back to Copper Creek. I will bring that poultice by tomorrow morning and we can treat your mare properly." "Would you like some water before you go?" Adelaide offered. "Maybe some coffee. It is the least I can do." "Coffee sounds good, if it is not too much trouble." Adelaide led him to the house, suddenly very conscious of how small and plain her home was. The single room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a curtained-off area in the back for her bed. The furniture was handmade and simple, the decorations minimal. But it was clean and neat, and she was not ashamed of it, even if it could not compare to the grand ranch houses she imagined someone like Dylan must be accustomed to. She poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that was always on the stove and handed one to Dylan. He took it with a nod of thanks and sipped carefully, the coffee still hot. "This is good," he said appreciatively. "Strong enough to stand a spoon in, just how I like it." Adelaide found herself smiling despite her earlier worries. "My father always said weak coffee was an insult to the beans." Wise man. Dylan looked around the room, his gaze taking in the details. "You have made a real home here. That takes effort when you are working as hard as you must be just to keep things running." "A person still needs a place to rest at the end of the day," Adelaide replied. She settled into the chair across from him, wrapping her hands around her own coffee cup. The heat felt good against her sore palms. Dylan noticed the gesture and his eyes dropped to her hands. Adelaide saw him take in the rough condition of them, the calluses and cuts and broken nails. She felt an instinctive urge to hide them, to be ashamed, but before she could move, Dylan spoke. "Those are good hands," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Adelaide look up to meet his eyes. "Working hands. My mother used to say you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by their hands. Soft hands meant soft character," she claimed. But hands that showed hard work, hands with calluses and scars, those were hands that built character and strength. Adelaide felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. It was not just relief at his words, though that was part of it. It was a kind of recognition, an acknowledgement that the sacrifices she had made, the hard work she put in day after day, meant something. That she was not foolish for staying, for fighting to keep her father's land, for choosing independence over an easier path. "Thank you," she said softly. That means more than you might realize." They talked for another half hour, the conversation flowing easily despite the fact that they barely knew each other. Dylan told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to work cattle and horses from the time he was old enough to sit a saddle. Adelaide shared stories about her father, about the years when her mother had still been alive and they had been a complete family, before illness had taken her mother and left just Adelaide and her father to manage alone. When Dylan finally stood to leave, Adelaide walked him out to his horse. He mounted and looked down at her, his expression serious. "I meant what I said, Miss Kane. If you need help, any kind of help, you send word to Copper Creek. I will come. That is a promise." "Adelaide," she said impulsively, "if we are going to be neighbors, you should call me Adelaide." His smile returned, warm and genuine. "Adelaide, and you should call me Dylan." "All right, Dylan. I will see you tomorrow then." She watched him ride away, and this time the loneliness that usually followed such departures did not come. Instead, she felt something like hope, fragile and new but real nonetheless. True to his word, Dylan arrived the next morning with a tin of drawing salve and clean bandaging material. Together, they treated Penny's hoof, applying the poultice and wrapping it carefully to keep it clean. Dylan showed Adelaide how to change the bandage and reapply the medicine, his instructions clear and patient. She should be sound enough to ride in about 10 days, he estimated, running a hand down Penny's neck. Keep her in the corral, no wandering around the pasture where she might step on something else. Clean water and good feed and let time do its work. "I will," Adelaide promised. "Thank you again, Dylan. I really do appreciate all your help." "It is my pleasure," he assured her. Then, somewhat hesitantly, he added, "Adelaide, I was thinking. Since you are without a horse for a while, I could stop by every few days on my way to and from work. Just to check in, make sure everything is all right. And if you need anything from town, I go in every Saturday. I could pick up supplies for you." Adelaide knew she should probably refuse, should insist on maintaining her independence. But the truth was, his offer was both practical and kind, and she found she did not want to refuse. She liked Dylan's company, liked the way he treated her as an equal rather than a helpless woman who needed to be managed and directed. "I would like that," she said honestly. "Both the visits and the help with supplies, but you have to let me repay you somehow. Maybe I could send eggs or vegetables from my garden. I usually have more than I can use myself." Dylan considered this, then nodded. "That seems fair. The cook at the bunkhouse would probably appreciate fresh vegetables, and I have not had a proper egg in longer than I care to admit." "You have a deal." They shook hands on it, and Adelaide was suddenly very aware of the warmth of his palm against hers, the way his larger hand engulfed her smaller one. His hands were every bit as work-roughened as her own, and somehow that made the contact feel more intimate, a meeting of equals who understood the cost of survival in this harsh land. Over the following 2 weeks, Dylan stopped by Adelaide's ranch 5 times. The visits became the highlights of her days, something to look forward to during the long hours of work. He always found some legitimate reason for the visit, checking on Penny's progress or bringing supplies from town, but they both knew the real reason was simply to spend time together. They talked about everything and nothing. Dylan told her about the challenges of working on a large cattle operation, about the politics and personalities among the ranch hands and the foremen. Adelaide shared her struggles with the garden, with the endless battle against heat and pests, and her own inexperience. They discovered shared opinions on everything from the best way to train a horse to the likelihood of Arizona becoming a full state someday instead of just a territory. On Dylan's 4th visit, Adelaide invited him to stay for dinner. It was a simple meal, chicken stewed with vegetables from her garden and fresh biscuits, but Dylan ate like it was a feast, praising her cooking until Adelaide felt her cheeks heat with pleasure. "This is infinitely better than bunkhouse food," he declared, soaking up the last of the stew with a biscuit. "The cook we have now is better than some we have had, but he is still a limited range. Everything tastes pretty much the same after a while." "I enjoy cooking when I have the time," Adelaide admitted. "My mother taught me. She said a good meal could lift spirits even on the hardest days. She was right about that." Dylan helped her clear the dishes, ignoring her protests that he was a guest and should not be working. They stood side by side at her small wash basin, Dylan washing while Adelaide dried, and the domestic intimacy of the moment was not lost on either of them. When the dishes were done, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The silence between them was comfortable, companionable, and Adelaide realized with a start that she had not felt this content, this at peace, in years. "Adelaide," Dylan said quietly, breaking the silence, "I hope you do not think I am being too forward, but I want you to know that I find your company deeply enjoyable. These visits have become something I look forward to more than just about anything else in my week." Adelaide's heart began to beat faster. She turned to look at him and found him watching her with an expression that was both hopeful and uncertain. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "You have made these past weeks much less lonely." Dylan reached over and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. Adelaide looked down at their joined hands, at the matching calluses and scars that marked both of them. "I know this might seem sudden," Dylan continued, his voice low and earnest, "but I would like permission to court you properly, if you are amenable to that. I want to spend more time with you, to get to know you better, to see if this connection between us might grow into something more." Adelaide felt a rush of emotions, excitement and fear and hope all tangled together. She had thought herself resigned to a life alone, had convinced herself that independence was enough. But Dylan made her remember that there was more to life than just surviving, that there could be companionship and affection and maybe even love. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Dylan's smile was brilliant, and he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was chaste but intimate, and Adelaide felt warmth spread through her entire body. "You have made me very happy, Adelaide Kane," Dylan said. "You have made me happy too, Dylan Jameson." The courtship that followed was necessarily constrained by the realities of their lives. Dylan worked long days at Copper Creek Ranch, often from before dawn until after dark. Adelaide had her own endless list of tasks that could not be neglected. But they found time for each other nonetheless. Dylan began stopping by every evening after work, even if just for half an hour. They would sit on the porch and talk about their days, sharing the small triumphs and frustrations. Sometimes Dylan would help with whatever task Adelaide was working on, the two of them falling into an easy rhythm of cooperation. Other times, Adelaide would have coffee or lemonade waiting, and they would simply enjoy each other's presence as the desert cooled and the stars emerged overhead. On Sundays, Dylan's day off, he would arrive in the morning and stay until evening. They would attend the small church services held in Naco when Adelaide could arrange for a neighbor to lend her a horse, Dylan riding alongside her. Afterward, they would often go on long rides through the desert, Dylan showing Adelaide parts of the territory she had never seen, beautiful hidden canyons and unexpected springs where green things grew in defiance of the surrounding aridity. It was on one of these Sunday rides, about 2 months into their courtship, that Adelaide finally let down the last of her walls. They had stopped beside a small creek, one of the few that ran year-round, and were resting in the shade of cottonwood trees while their horses drank. "I was so scared after my father died," Adelaide found herself saying, the words coming easier than she expected. "Everyone told me I should sell the ranch, that I could not manage alone. Part of me believed they were right. But another part of me was so angry at the idea of giving up, of admitting defeat. That ranch was my father's dream, and it felt like betraying his memory to just walk away." Dylan listened intently, his whiskey-colored eyes focused entirely on her. "I worked harder than I ever had in my life," Adelaide continued. "Every day, dawn to dusk and often beyond. My hands started to change, to get rough and damaged. I told myself it did not matter, that survival was more important than vanity. But sometimes I would see women in town with their soft hands and pretty dresses, and I would feel so ashamed of what I had become, like I had failed at being a proper woman somehow." "Adelaide," Dylan said gently, reaching for her hands. He held them carefully, his thumbs tracing over her calluses. "These hands are beautiful. Do you know what I see when I look at them? I see strength and determination. I see someone who refused to give up even when everyone told her she should. I see character built through adversity, resilience forged through hard work." He lifted her hands and pressed kisses to both palms, right over the calluses that Adelaide had been so self-conscious about. The gesture was so tender, so full of genuine affection, that Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "These hands built character and strength," Dylan said firmly. "And I admire them and you more than I can properly express." Adelaide felt something break open inside her, some last defended place where she had been holding fear and shame. She leaned forward and Dylan met her halfway, their lips coming together in their first real kiss. It was gentle and sweet and tasted like possibility, like the promise of a future that might hold more than just solitary survival. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Dylan rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Adelaide Kane," he said quietly. "I think I have been since the first time I saw you trying to secure those supplies to your saddle, so determined and independent. You have the strongest spirit of anyone I have ever met." "I am falling in love with you too," Adelaide admitted. "You make me believe that I can have both independence and companionship, that wanting help does not make me weak." "You are the furthest thing from weak," Dylan assured her. "You are the strongest woman I know." They spent the rest of that afternoon by the creek, talking and kissing and making plans for a future they both wanted to share. By the time they rode back to Adelaide's ranch as the sun was setting, everything had changed between them. The courtship had become something deeper, a commitment to build a life together. 2 weeks later, Dylan formally proposed. He did it at Adelaide's ranch, getting down on one knee in the yard where she had worked so hard to keep her father's dream alive. He held her calloused hands in his and asked her to marry him, to let him stand beside her and share both the work and the joy of their lives. Adelaide said yes without hesitation. They married a month later in the small church in Naco, with half the cowboys from Copper Creek in attendance along with neighbors from surrounding ranches. Adelaide wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Dylan had brought her from town, white cotton with blue trim. She carried wildflowers that grew along the creek where they had first confessed their love. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dylan kissed Adelaide like she was the most precious thing in the world. The cowboys cheered and someone fired off a celebratory shot into the air, and Adelaide felt happier than she had since before her father's death. The reception was held at Copper Creek Ranch, in the large main house that belonged to the ranch owner, Mr. Thornton. The older man had taken a liking to Dylan and was pleased to host the celebration. There was food and music, and Adelaide danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling like she was living in a dream. "Happy, Mrs. Jameson?" Dylan asked as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I can say," Adelaide confirmed, "though it feels strange to have a new name." "You will always be Adelaide Kane to me too," Dylan assured her. "The strong, independent woman who won my heart. Marriage does not change that." They spent their wedding night at Adelaide's ranch, which would now become their shared home. Dylan had given notice at Copper Creek, planning to work Adelaide's land and build it into something bigger. Mr. Thornton had been understanding, even offering to buy beef cattle from them once they expanded their operation. In the morning, Adelaide woke wrapped in Dylan's arms, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had not since childhood. The hard years of solitary struggle had not been erased, but they had led her to this moment, to this man who saw her strength as beautiful and her calloused hands as proof of character. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The work of expanding the ranch was exhausting, and money was tight as they invested everything they could into buying cattle and improving the property. But they faced everything together, Dylan's strength complementing Adelaide's, their individual capabilities multiplying when combined. Dylan built an addition onto the house, giving them a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. Adelaide expanded her garden, and together they dug a new irrigation channel to keep it watered more efficiently. They bought a small herd of cattle, just 20 head to start, and Dylan taught Adelaide everything he knew about managing them. Sometimes Adelaide would catch Dylan watching her as she worked, and the look in his eyes made her heart flutter every time. He would come up behind her while she was cooking or mending and wrap his arms around her waist, pressing kisses to her neck, and telling her how much he loved her. At night, they would lie in their bed and talk about their dreams for the future, about the ranch they were building and the family they hoped to have someday. In the spring of their second year together, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Dylan one evening as they sat on the porch, the same porch where they had shared so many conversations during their courtship. "Dylan, I have something to tell you," she began, suddenly nervous despite having no reason to be. He turned to her immediately, concern crossing his features. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Something is very right, actually." Adelaide took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Dylan just stared at her, processing the information. Then a huge smile broke across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the neighboring ranch. He picked Adelaide up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "Adelaide, you have made me the happiest man alive." "I am happy too," Adelaide said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "And maybe a little scared." "We will figure it out together," Dylan promised, pulling her close, "just like we figure out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Adelaide found the Arizona heat more oppressive than usual as her body changed and grew. Dylan was endlessly attentive, taking over the heavier chores and fussing over her in a way that Adelaide found both touching and occasionally annoying. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know," Dylan said sheepishly. "I just want to take care of you." "You do take care of me," Adelaide assured him. "Every single day, but I also need to stay active and useful. I will go crazy if you try to make me sit still for the next few months." They compromised, Adelaide continuing to do most of her normal work, but accepting Dylan's help more readily and avoiding anything too physically demanding. As her belly grew, she found herself marveling at the changes in her body, at the life growing inside her that she and Dylan had created together. In late September of 1884, as the brutal summer heat was finally beginning to ease, Adelaide went into labor. They had arranged for a midwife from Naco to come and stay with them as the due date approached, a capable woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through an entire night and into the next afternoon. Dylan stayed by Adelaide's side the whole time, holding her hand through the contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, and offering whatever comfort he could. Adelaide gripped his hand hard enough to leave bruises, but he never complained, just murmured encouragement and told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, and Mrs. Rodriguez cleaned him quickly before placing him in Adelaide's exhausted arms. "A boy," the midwife announced with satisfaction. "Good healthy lungs on him." Adelaide looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He was perfect, from his shock of dark hair to his miniature fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Dylan leaned over them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. "He is beautiful, Adelaide, absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. They had discussed names but had not made a final decision. Now, looking at their son, the answer came to Adelaide immediately. "I would like to name him after my father," she said. "James Kane Jameson." "So he carries a piece of the man who started all of this, who built the ranch we are raising him on." Dylan nodded, clearly moved. "James, it is perfect. James Kane Jameson, welcome to the world." The early days of parenthood were exhausting in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. James was a demanding baby, nursing frequently and sleeping only in short bursts. Adelaide walked the floor with him for hours, rocking and soothing and singing soft lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. Dylan helped however he could, changing diapers and bringing Adelaide food and water while she nursed. He would take James in the evenings, walking the porch with the baby against his shoulder so Adelaide could have a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. They were both perpetually tired, but also filled with a fierce love for their son. As James grew from a newborn into an infant and then a toddler, Adelaide watched Dylan become the father she had always known he would be. He was patient and gentle, playing with James for hours, teaching him about the horses and cattle, letting the little boy follow him around the ranch like a devoted shadow. Adelaide continued to work the ranch alongside Dylan, James often strapped to her back in a sling or playing nearby as she tended the garden. Her hands remained calloused and work-worn, perhaps even more so now that there was even more work to be done. But she wore them with pride now, understanding that they represented not just survival but success, a life built through determination and love. When James was 2 years old, Adelaide became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She delivered a healthy baby girl in the spring of 1887, a process that was shorter and less difficult than James's birth had been. They named their daughter Sarah Ann, after Dylan's mother. She had a cap of golden hair and her father's whiskey-colored eyes, and she smiled more than any baby Adelaide had ever seen. James was initially suspicious of this new creature who took up so much of his parents' attention, but within a few weeks, he had become fiercely protective of his baby sister. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. The beef cattle operation expanded to over 100 head, and they hired a young cowboy named Miguel to help Dylan with the work. Adelaide's garden became legendary in the area, producing vegetables that she sold or traded in Naco, adding to the family income. The house grew too, another addition giving James and Sarah their own rooms. Money was no longer quite so tight, though they were far from wealthy. They could afford small luxuries now. New clothes when they needed them, store-bought fabric instead of only homespun, candy for the children on special occasions. But both Adelaide and Dylan remembered the lean years, the struggle to survive, and they remained careful with their resources, always thinking ahead to the future. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Dylan surprised Adelaide with a gift. He led her outside to find a beautiful young mare tied to the porch rail, a dapple gray with intelligent eyes and a gentle disposition. "Dylan, she is beautiful," Adelaide breathed, approaching the mare slowly. "But we cannot afford this." "We can now," Dylan said, pride evident in his voice. "I have been saving, putting aside a little from every cattle sale. I wanted to get you something special, something that would remind you every day how much I love you." Adelaide ran her hands over the mare's sleek coat, then turned to Dylan with tears in her eyes. "Thank you. I love her." "What should I name her?" "That is up to you," Dylan said, pulling her into his arms. "She is yours." Adelaide thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope. I will name her Hope, because you gave me hope when I thought I had to face everything alone." Dylan kissed her then, right there in the yard with the children playing nearby and the mare looking on curiously. It was the kind of kiss that still made Adelaide's heart race even after 5 years of marriage, full of passion and promise and deep, abiding love. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and occasional sorrow. They lost a pregnancy between Sarah and their 3rd child, a miscarriage that devastated Adelaide for months. Dylan held her through her grief, reminding her that they still had James and Sarah, that they could try again when she was ready. When Adelaide did become pregnant again, they were both cautiously hopeful. This time, she delivered twin boys, identical and healthy and absolutely exhausting. They named them Daniel and David, and the household became significantly more chaotic with 4 children under the age of 8. Adelaide sometimes felt like she was drowning in the endless needs of small children. The cooking and cleaning and mending multiplied beyond what she had thought possible. But Dylan was always there, sharing the load, watching the children so Adelaide could have a few hours to herself, reminding her that they were building something beautiful together. James grew into a serious, responsible boy who adored working alongside his father. He learned to ride before he was 6 and could rope a calf by 8. Sarah was more interested in the garden and the house, learning to cook and sew from her mother, but she also had an unexpected talent for gentling horses. The twins were wild and rambunctious, constantly getting into mischief, but also bringing laughter and energy into every day. When Adelaide was 35, they added one final child to their family, a daughter they named Catherine. She was a surprise, coming years after the twins when Adelaide had thought her childbearing days were done. But she was welcomed with love, doted on by her older siblings and cherished by parents who had learned to savor every moment of their children's fleeting youth. Through all of it, through the hard work and sleepless nights, the financial worries and occasional disasters, Adelaide and Dylan's love only deepened. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Dylan never stopped telling Adelaide how beautiful he found her, how much he admired her strength. Adelaide never stopped feeling grateful for a man who saw her calloused hands as marks of honor rather than shame. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they took a rare evening to themselves, leaving the older children in charge while they rode out to the creek where Dylan had first kissed Adelaide all those years ago. The cottonwoods had grown taller, the creek perhaps slightly lower than Adelaide remembered, but the magic of the place remained. They spread a blanket on the bank and sat together as the sun set, Dylan's arm around Adelaide's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Have you been happy, Adelaide?" Dylan asked quietly. "With this life we built." Adelaide looked down at her hands, at the calluses that had never gone away despite having help now. They told the story of her life, of early struggles and hard-won victories, of fields planted and children raised, and a partnership that had weathered every storm. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. "When I was alone after Father died, I thought survival was the best I could hope for. I never imagined I could have all this. The ranch, the children, you gave me everything, Dylan." "We gave it to each other," Dylan corrected gently. He took her hands in his, holding them with the same reverence he had shown that day so many years ago. "These hands built our life, Adelaide. Your strength, your determination, your refusal to give up, that is what created all of this." "Our strength," Adelaide corrected, squeezing his hands. "Together." "Together," Dylan agreed, and kissed her as the last light faded from the sky. The years continued their inexorable march, bringing changes both welcome and bittersweet. James grew to adulthood and took on more responsibility for the ranch, eventually marrying a nice girl from Naco and building a house on the far edge of the property. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher, and Adelaide and Dylan supported her dream, sending her to a teaching college in Tucson. The twins remained at home, working the ranch alongside their father and older brother. Catherine, the baby, was still just a girl but already showing signs of having inherited her mother's independent spirit. Adelaide and Dylan aged together, their hair graying, their joints sometimes aching after long days of work. But they never stopped working, never stopped building and planning and dreaming. The ranch that Adelaide's father had started and that Adelaide had fought so hard to keep had become a thriving operation, supporting not just their family but James's family and the families of the men they employed. When Adelaide was 50, she and Dylan took a trip to Texas so she could meet his mother and sisters, something they had never had the time or money for before. It was wonderful to see where Dylan had come from, to meet the women who had helped shape him. Dylan's mother, white-haired but still sharp-eyed, took Adelaide's hands in hers during their visit. "These are working hands," the old woman said approvingly. "Dylan wrote me about you, about how hard you worked and how strong you were. I am glad he found someone who understands the value of hard work." "Your son taught me to be proud of these hands," Adelaide replied. "He showed me they were something to value rather than hide. Then he learned the lessons I tried to teach him," Dylan's mother said with satisfaction. The trip was a good one, but both Adelaide and Dylan were happy to return to Arizona, to the ranch that had become so much more than just land and buildings. It was home, in the deepest sense of the word. It was where they had built their life together, where their children had been born and raised, where every fence post and building held memories. The 20th century arrived, bringing changes to the territory. Talk of statehood was becoming serious now, and there were automobiles beginning to appear in the larger towns, though they remained rare curiosities in rural areas like Naco. The world was changing, becoming more modern, but the essential rhythms of ranch life remained the same. When Adelaide was 55, Arizona finally achieved statehood, becoming the 48th state in 1912. There were celebrations in Naco, and Adelaide and Dylan attended with their children and grandchildren. James's 2 sons running wild with the other children, while Catherine, now a young woman herself, danced with a rancher's son who had been courting her for months. "Our children are having children of their own," Adelaide marveled as she and Dylan watched the festivities. "When did we get old enough for that?" Slowly and then all at once, Dylan replied with a smile. He still looked at her with the same love and admiration he had shown from the beginning, despite the lines on her face and the silver in her hair. "But you are as beautiful to me now as you were the day we met, Adelaide. More beautiful, because you are the woman who has been by my side through everything. And you are the man who saw strength where others saw only roughness," Adelaide replied, holding up her hands. They were more gnarled now, the joints swollen slightly with arthritis that came from decades of hard work. But Dylan took them gently and kissed them, just as he had done so many times over the years. "These hands built character and strength," he said, repeating the words he had spoken that first time. "They built our life, our family, our future. I will never stop being grateful for them and for you." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes, the happy tears of a woman who had found not just survival but genuine joy and love. "I love you, Dylan Jameson, today, tomorrow, and always. And I love you, Adelaide, forever." They danced together under the Arizona stars, in the new state that had been their home for so long. Their children and grandchildren swirled around them, the fruits of their love and labor. The ranch waited for them, solid and enduring, a testament to what could be built through hard work, determination, and partnership. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Dylan grew into the roles of respected elders in their community. Young couples starting out would come to them for advice, and Adelaide would share the lessons she had learned about survival and perseverance. She never hid her calloused hands, wearing them instead as badges of honor, proof that a woman could be both strong and feminine, could work hard and also love deeply. Dylan's hair turned completely white, and he moved a bit slower, but he never stopped working the ranch he loved. James and the twins had taken over most of the heavy work, but Dylan was still involved in every decision, his experience and wisdom invaluable. When they reached their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a huge celebration. All 5 children were there, along with 9 grandchildren and even 1 great-grandchild, Sarah's daughter's infant son. The ranch house overflowed with people, multiple generations gathered to honor the couple who had built something lasting. 40 years, Adelaide marveled to Dylan as they stood together on the porch, looking out over the assembled family. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you stopped by asking for water for your horses. Other times, it feels like a lifetime ago." "It has been a good life," Dylan said contentedly. "The best I could have hoped for. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. Everything I have, everything I am is because of you." "We built it together," Adelaide corrected, as she always did. "Your strength supported mine. We were partners in every way." Inside, someone called for them to come cut the cake. As they walked back into the house hand in hand, their children's faces beaming at them, their grandchildren running around their feet, Adelaide felt a profound sense of gratitude. The scared, lonely young woman who had once stood alone in a dusty yard, wondering how she would survive, had become this: a matriarch of a large, loving family, a successful rancher, a woman who had proven that strength came in many forms. The years rolled on, bringing both celebrations and sorrows. They lost friends to age and illness. They celebrated weddings and births. They weathered droughts and good years, economic panics and recoveries. Through it all, Adelaide and Dylan remained constant to each other, their love the bedrock on which everything else was built. When Adelaide was 73, Dylan fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away and progressed to pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of doctors and Adelaide's devoted nursing, he did not recover. He died on a warm spring evening, surrounded by his family, holding Adelaide's hand to the very end. "I have loved you every single day," he whispered to her in his final moments. "These have been the best years of my life, Adelaide. Thank you for sharing them with me." "I love you," Adelaide replied, her voice breaking. "I will always love you." When he was gone, Adelaide felt like a piece of herself had been torn away. They had been together for 51 years, more than 2/3 of her life. She had forgotten what it was like to face the world alone. The grief was profound, a physical ache that made it hard to breathe sometimes. But Adelaide was surrounded by love and support. Her children stayed close, taking turns sitting with her. Her grandchildren brought brightness into the dark days. And slowly, gradually, Adelaide began to heal. She remained on the ranch, of course. It was her home, the place where she and Dylan had built their life together. She could see him in every corner of the property, could hear his voice in the wind and feel his presence in the quiet evenings. James and the twins ran the operation now, but Adelaide still kept her garden, still worked with her hands, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of labor. One evening, several months after Dylan's death, Adelaide sat on the porch watching the sunset. Catherine, now a married woman with children of her own, came to sit beside her. "How are you doing, Mama?" Catherine asked gently. Adelaide looked down at her hands, gnarled and worn from more than 7 decades of life and work. The calluses had thinned slightly with age, but they were still there, permanent marks of the life she had lived. "I miss him every moment," Adelaide admitted, "but I am grateful too. Grateful for every year we had together, for this family we built, for the life we shared. Your father taught me that strength does not mean not needing anyone. Real strength is found in partnership, in supporting each other through everything life brings." She held up her hands and Catherine took them gently. "He used to kiss these hands and tell me they had built character and strength," Adelaide continued, her voice soft with memory. "I think he was right. These hands have built so much. They built this ranch, raised you children, created a home. They are proof that I lived fully, that I did not shy away from hard work or hard choices." "You are the strongest woman I know, Mama," Catherine said, tears in her eyes, "and the best mother anyone could ask for." Adelaide lived for another 7 years, remaining active and engaged despite her advancing age. She saw more grandchildren born, attended more weddings, and held her first great-great-grandchild when she was 78. She remained sharp and clear-headed until the very end, still working in her garden, still offering advice and wisdom to anyone who asked. When she finally passed, peacefully in her sleep at age 80, the entire community mourned. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, multiple generations who had been touched by her life and example. She was buried beside Dylan, on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the endless Arizona sky. But Adelaide's legacy lived on. The ranch continued to thrive under James and then his sons. Sarah's teaching inspired dozens of students to pursue education and better their lives. The twins' children carried on the traditions of hard work and integrity that their grandparents had exemplified. Catherine's daughters grew up hearing stories about their remarkable grandmother, who had refused to give up when life was hardest. And whenever anyone asked what made Adelaide Kane Jameson so special, the answer always included a mention of her hands. Those calloused, work-worn hands that had built not just a ranch but a legacy. Hands that had known hardship and triumph, loss and love. Hands that proved strength came from perseverance, that beauty could be found in the marks left by a life fully lived. Years after Adelaide's death, one of her great-granddaughters was struggling with her own challenges, feeling inadequate because her hands were rough from the work she did. Her grandmother, Adelaide's daughter Catherine took the young woman's hands in her own and told her the story she had heard so many times. "Your great-grandfather used to kiss your great-grandmother's hands and tell her, 'These hands built character and strength,'" Catherine said. And he was right. Do not be ashamed of hands that show honest work. Be proud of them. They are proof you are not afraid to do what needs to be done, that you have the strength to face challenges head-on. You come from a line of strong women, and these hands prove you are continuing that tradition. The story was passed down through generations, becoming a part of family lore. The ranch that Adelaide had fought so hard to keep became a landmark in the area, a successful operation that employed dozens of people and contributed to the local economy. The house she and Dylan had built and expanded was carefully maintained, a physical reminder of what could be accomplished through determination and love. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Adelaide and Dylan were together again. In that place, they walked hand in hand across endless golden grasslands under cloudless skies, forever young, forever in love, forever proud of the life they had built and the legacy they had left behind. Their hands, once again smooth and unmarked, were clasped together, but the strength those calluses had represented remained. It lived on in their descendants, in the land they had worked, in the love story that had proven that true partnership could overcome any obstacle. The calloused hands had built more than just character and strength. They had built a dynasty, a family, a love that transcended death itself. And that, more than anything, was the true measure of Adelaide Kane Jameson's remarkable life.